You got to know yourself. You got to know the good, the bad, the ugly about yourself and just own it. And all those psychological studies have shown that when you understand the good and the bad and the ugly about yourself and accept that, you're going to be secure. You're going to be more confident, more humble. You can be more vulnerable. And that's a very important thing today. People don't want anybody else to see their bad parts, but they're actually seeing them every day. The other people are seeing them around them.
How do you strengthen your resilience in the face of adversity? In 1967, Air Force fighter pilot Lee Ellis was shot down over North Vietnam and held captive as a POW for over 5 years. Today, he is a successful leadership coach, a speaker, an author of 3 books, including an award-winning book, and has impacted the lives of countless people. And today, we're going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about honor. How do you overcome adversity and strengthen your resilience, and the power of commitment, and so much more. So I'm really excited to have him here. Lee, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. And, I just celebrate every day to be here and alive and well and sharing and connecting with others. That's wonderful.
Well, you have such an incredible story, and I've loved even reading one of your books and the 2 others, which I just received in the mail. I haven't gone through them in detail, but will. Certainly, I'd ask you to send those because they just are so powerful. But even the stories that we're going to talk about, the romance stories in the midst of it, but also in the midst of that, talking about how what it was like to be in that, in that situation for so many years and what you learned. And so I'm excited to get into it. But before we do that, I want to do a shout out to Kurt, because Kurt Euler is the one who connected us. And so thank you, Kurt. I love the connections that I get through this podcast. I get to meet amazing people like you. I would have never had the opportunity to meet you without this podcast. And Kurt was a guest on our show back at episode 472. We talked about servant leadership and scaling growth. And here we are now talking about resilience. And so thank you, Kurt. I appreciate the introduction. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your story, and also then what also led to these books, specifically as you talk about leadership and honor, engagement, and then of course your most recent book.
Yes. Well, I can tell the long stories, and I need to tell some short stories here today. But I grew up on a farm in Georgia. And I plowed mules and drove tractors. And in less than 10 years, I went from plowing mules to flying supersonic jets because I'd always wanted to fly jets and fly airplanes and to fly jets. And so I got into ROTC in college and graduated. And 3 days later, I was in flight school in the Air Force. And 53 weeks later, I had my wings and my class graduated. And over half of us got an assignment that said F-4 Phantom pipeline, which would be checking out in the F-4 Phantom, Southeast Asia. That meant we were going to war. And within less than a year, we'd been through survival school, land survival, sea survival, wood survival, all those kind of survival schools, and combat training. And we headed over and got over there in the first week of July, 1967. And I flew 53 combat missions over North Vietnam. We were primarily trying to prevent them from trucking people and all sorts of ammunitions and stuff down to the south for the Viet Cong and for their troops, where the North Vietnamese were invading South Vietnam on the sides out of Laos. They were coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then when they came to the barrier between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, they would send them over to Laos, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail went over there and it went down through Laos because Laos was alongside the South Vietnam for several hundred miles, and that's what they were doing. So, and I had combat missions to support the Marine Corps and the Army soldiers on the ground that were fighting. And we had some combat missions in Laos where we bombed up bridges and roads and that sort of thing.
Well, one of my favorite movies is Top Gun. And it's one thing to see it in a movie. It's another thing to live it like you've lived it. So what happened on that day where you got shot down?
Well, we were getting shot at. We were attacking an area there on the river, north of the river, and it was an anti-aircraft artillery shooting at us, and that's what we were attacking because it was protecting. There was a ferry there to go over the river, and that's what they were protecting. And so we were trying to blow up that anti-aircraft artillery group. And so right after the bombs came off my airplane, it blew up within 2 seconds. And it didn't just get hit, it just blew up into
Wow.
several chunks. And fortunately, the canopy or the cockpit was tumbling, and I knew that I had to eject. And my partner and I, with two pilots in the Air Force F-4s, and we both ejected immediately because it was about to hit the ground. And we both got a good parachute and came down, and they caught him in his parachute coming down before he hit the ground.
Wow.
And I was able to do my parachute landing fall and jump down into a bomb crater. And I pulled out my radio and to the emergency radio and called the wingman and the forward air controller that was nearby in the F-100. And I said, hey, I'm on the ground. I'm 200 meters north of the river. I'm headed south to the river. Start strafing. And I saw them 7 years later after I come home and been home. I was at a fighter pilot reunion. And the guy said, hey, man, I heard your call, but I couldn't shoot that well. They were too close to you. And I said, you're exactly right. They captured me within 2 minutes.
Wow.
And they captured me and stripped me down and gave me my flight suit back and then tied me up and put a blindfold on me. And my hands were tied behind my back and I had a blindfold on. I could see underneath that blindfold. It was just kind of tied across my eyes. I could see down below where I was walking. And they put a rope around my neck and pulled me over to another village, and they put me underground, and I heard somebody breathing, and I said, Ken, is that you? Because I'm blindfolded. He said, yeah. I said, you okay? He said, yeah, you? I said, yeah, I'm fine. We both had some wounds. Okay. We had
Yeah.
some severe wounds, but you didn't notice them then. And about a minute later, they came in and took me away from him, and I didn't see him again for 2 weeks. So we're on the road to Hanoi. We were in a truck
Wow.
on the road to Hanoi. And he and I spent over 4 years, actually 5 years together in the same cell. And he was a great guy. He had been a high school New York State wrestling champion. He'd been a college wrestling guy at University of Pennsylvania. He was very tough mentally and physically. He was very sound and a great leader. And he was a person who really influenced me a lot over the next few years. I grew up a lot under him.
Well, yeah. I mean, the stories, like, I mean, we probably could be here for days, telling stories about what it was like to be there and to be in that position where, yeah, you don't know how long you're going to be there. You don't know what you're going to endure, when the next torturing session is going to be, and what, obviously they wanted to get information and interrogate you for that. What's interesting is that when you and I were talking before this interview, you were saying that the average lifespan of a POW is 86. And so as we were talking, I was quickly Googling and I was like, what's the average lifespan of the average American male? And it is 74. And I found that really interesting because we're talking about an additional 74.8. So an additional 11 years on average.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been around for a while. I don't know how old you are now. I think you said you're 82.
I'll be 82 in a few months.
In a few months. Yeah. So by the time this releases, and it's like, what did you learn there and develop there? And did you come in with it, or did you learn it there? That resilience that literally has lasted a lifetime, even after you've come back. Even many of your friends, you said, like, there's a lot of the POWs, former POWs that are like over 90, living vibrant lives right now.
25% of us are over 90 now.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. That's amazing, considering everything that you endured, everything that you physically, your body, you endured, your mindset, like the mental, a drain, like I don't even know what to call it, the torture that they put you through and all of that, the emotional. So what do you think is the secret to that? Like, what was it that you developed that maybe we can learn today? Because people are going through, maybe certainly not the same kinds of things, but we're all going through some level of adversity. And I just find like our society has gotten so weak. Everybody's like offended. You said something to me and it offended me, and I'm now I need to go in and get therapy for it. It's like, wow. And then at the same time, you've been through so much.
I think part of it was we were committed to our mission.
Okay. Yeah.
And we were still alive, a lot of our friends had gone down. I'd lost already two roommates that I didn't think were going to be POWs. I thought they were missing in action, but I didn't. Two roommates going through flight school or combat training or in Vietnam. And, I just had to, I started to cry when the second one went down in August of 1967. I'd been there a couple of months and I had tears coming down because I lost this great guy. He was a wonderful guy. And I said, Lee, you just got to shut down your emotions right now. You got a job to do and, you can worry about that later. You got to do your job. And that was part of it. But a big part of it was that, air crews have to be mentally and physically more stronger than the average person. And the fighter pilots are very competitive. We got a lot of confidence. We are almost over the top sometimes in our arrogance, but there we learned to be very humble. When we got captured and we were still alive and we had to be very humble, but we also had to be competitive and to keep our commitments. And the fact that there's guys here that have been here 2 years longer than me and they're in the camp down the two, three doors down and the cells down, and they're still alive and they're still carrying on and they're still doing work, communicating, hiding and communicating and overpowering the enemy by doing that. And I've got to live up to that. If they can do it, I can do it. And that really helped a lot. But we learn to bounce back. We learn to suffer. You gotta suffer. Everybody has to suffer in life. And what we learned is that we could recover from suffering if we kept our commitments and we sometimes, giving in to torture and reading a propaganda thing for they were recording stuff, and we were tortured to do that, and we're tortured to sign a statement. I had my first torture. I was to fill out a 3-page biography. And two of my other cellmates were there too, doing the same thing, but they were separate cells. They were torture rooms, okay? And they were separate. And finally, I just couldn't resist anymore. And I told them I would do it. And I did. But in those 3 pages I filled out, there was only one true word. And that was my father's first and last name, 2 words, father's first and last name, because I wanted someday to write him a letter, but everything else was a lie. But they left me in there and I was tied back up after I filled it out. And I was crying like a baby because I was so ashamed that I couldn't beat him. When I got back to the room, one guy was already back, and Captain Fisher, who was a really tough guy, he came back a few hours later and he said, yeah, I had to give in, but we're going to give little as possible and going to bounce back. And we found out later that almost everybody in the camp had been tortured to do something like that. And that particular thing too. And they had bounced back and they'd given them nothing, They'd just given them something, but it was nothing. And that's what you had to do. But that became a process for us, a mission for us is don't let them beat us. And if they beat us, we're going to bounce back and we aren't going to let them beat us next time.
Yeah.
And so then after 2 years of my being a POW and 4 years for some of the long-term guys, we had guys that were there 5 to 8.5 years. Everett Alvarez was 8.5, but everybody else was there 5 to 8 years. And, the fact that with the last 3 years, because of the women, the POW MIA wives and families, they put pressure on our government to change their policy from keep quiet. They could go public. And then they started, Ross Perot and others paid for them to travel around the world and put pressure on the communists of North Vietnam about our torture and our treatment. And they were not obeying the agreement they had signed of the Paris Agreement of 1954. They were not allowing us to do what they would lenient and humane treatment and to write letters home. And so they weren't doing that. Well, when Ho Chi Minh died in September of 1969, the new leaders came in and they stopped the torture. So we had 2.5 years, 69, 3.5 years, 3 years and a few months to get healthy emotionally, mentally, and physically. And so we just started working every day to become positive and to be positive and to be honorable. We'd always been sacrificing ourselves to be honorable, but we just wanted to get over the PTSD. We didn't know about PTSD, but we wanted to get over the bad emotions, the guilt, the shame, the doubts and the fears, that kind of stuff, it just will make you, it'll take you under.
Yeah.
And we wanted to get over that before we went home. And so every day we tried to get a little healthier psychologically, mentally, and physically. And it really worked. And that's why we are outliving our peers. And the 25% of us, of the 5 to 8 years, 25% of us are over 90, 90 and
Amazing.
over.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, and I think about, like you said, we're outliving our peers. That mission, like you started off with saying that you had a mission. You had a mission when you went there, and when the mission changed, you changed the mission.
That's right.
And you know, we talk a lot nowadays about the importance of a mission, the importance of purpose in terms of creating a greater impact in the world. But it's not just for that. It's actually so that we can have something to look forward to. And I think that's why there's a lot of you see people that are older that they lose their purpose. I saw my parents, for example, as they started to age, and you know, some young people were telling my dad, you know, like, well, you don't really know what you're talking about, or you know, you're kind of like over the hill in business. And I'm like, you have so much experience, life experience.
Yeah.
You have more experience than, you know, he's got years, you know, that he's been alive. And so, you know, it's just a different season in your life, but you've got to keep your mind going. And so one of the things my parents always did, now they both died young, they died in their 70s, both from the similar type of thing, heart attacks. But I mean, ultimately, that was you know, that was what it was. But their mind, even up until that point, was very much sharp, because they were continuing to move forward, continuing to dream, continuing to have something to look forward to. And that was what kept them going, you know. And I think that we have this, you know, you retire at 65 and you know, you sit there and now is your time to golf and watch TV and do whatever. But actually that's a very new concept over the last few hundred years. That's not actually how we're designed. So first of all, talk about your books, talk about that, that purpose, like the Captured by Love, for example, where all these stories of people even like into their 90s living life, and that the importance of that mission. And then also with the emotion, being able to manage the emotion, not disconnect from it and become numb, but to apply it in the right areas to your mission.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think we didn't talk about this, but, you know, most of the guys had experienced some going to church or some part of their faith growing up. But when you lose control, when you're coming down your parachute, one guy said, hey, I was coming down in my parachute and I hadn't been to church in 5 or 6 years. And I looked up and said, Lord, I'm sorry, I hadn't been talking to you, lady, but I need you now. And so our faith became very strong. And a lot of guys that amazing fighter pilots would spend hours a day praying and focusing on connecting with the Lord. And that was very important. And then that helped us connect with each other. So we would forgive each other. In a cell, I lived with 55 guys for 19 months, elbow to elbow and sleeping. And there were, you know, 2 rows of sleeping guys on the concrete slab that was elevated. But we would walk together. We had certain times to go to bed and certain times to get up because people need to start walking. But we only had 2 times a guy yelled at another guy, and both times they apologized before they went to bed. Can you believe that? And these are aggressive fighter pilots mostly, and they just learned to get along. And that really helped us. We learned to live with others. We learned also, here's another important part. You got to know yourself. You got to know the good, the bad, the ugly about yourself, and just own it. And all those psychological studies have shown that when you understand the good and the bad and the ugly about yourself and accept that, you're going to be secure. You're going to be more confident, more humble, and you can be more vulnerable. And that's a very important thing today. People don't want anybody else to see their bad parts, but they're actually seeing them every day. The other people are seeing them around them. And so just own it and share that. And that's really what's helped us a lot in our marriages. You know, I was single and I've been married more than 50 years now. A few months ago, we celebrated our 50th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah. But, two or three guys have celebrated over 60 and their wives passed away. And now they've got a new wife and their wives are over 70, probably over 80, but they're just having a great time. But we learn to not be concerned. We learn to be secure. And when
Mm,
you're secure like that, that really helped us because when we got tortured, we became very insecure. The fact that we couldn't beat them and they could beat us, but we learned to bounce back and get ready to come when they come back again to torture me again. I'm going to be able to go, and I may not last as longer. I may not last longer, but I'm not going to give them what they want, you know?
yeah.
So that really
Yeah.
helped us to become emotionally and psychologically more healthy, and our faith was strengthened. And that really kind of wired all those together. Um, and we learned to accept others, people who are different from us.
Mm,
And in marriage, that's really important because my wife and I are three standard deviations apart on patience. She's got a lot. I got very little, almost none. I'm just like, let's go do it. Let's go do it.
yeah.
I'm headed this direction and I can switch directions quickly.
Yeah.
Can't do that. But she has a lot of talents I don't have.
Mm,
And I just focus on her talents and not on her struggles. We all have struggles that go with our talents. If
yeah.
you're smart and you're aggressive, and that's good in some places, but it's not good in other places.
Yeah.
You got to
Yeah.
learn to adapt.
Well, and you talk about maybe let's talk about the 7 core behaviors because honor, right? That the honor code. So one of your books, which is so the first one is Leading with Honor,
Mhm.
Leadership Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton. And then the second one is Engage with Honor, Building a Culture of Courageous Accountability. And then your third one, which is Captured by Love, which I've alluded to a few times already, inspiring true romance stories from Vietnam POWs that you wrote with Greg Godek as well. And so talk about this because I think there's some important leadership skills in there, like you said, about knowing your weaknesses, acknowledging the good, the bad, the ugly in yourself, and then acknowledging and appreciating others, accepting them for who they are as well. And
Yeah.
so we're not competing because you said like you were really competitive, still are, I'm
Yeah.
sure, it's innate. And so, but what are we competing against? What are we competing for? I think is important because there's a lot of competition right now in society and in businesses, and people compete even on the same team,
Yeah.
but they're competing against each other.
Mhm.
And there's a different way to go about that. And I think honor is a big part.
Yes, I think you have to. That's where I'm talking about believing in yourself. The more you believe in yourself, the more humble you can be. The more you can look at yourself and look at others. And you've got strengths and struggles. They've got strengths and struggles. Just don't worry about their struggles unless they're ethical struggles, and you need to
Right.
challenge that. But character, courage, and commitment are the three main ones of the start ground of this is the courageous accountability model. And you can see, and this is in the Engage with Honor book. You can go online and download that. But character, courage, and commitment is going to solidify where you are in your mission. Okay. And then you've got to clarify things. You have to clarify. And you ask questions sometimes to clarify. What did you mean by that? Give me your perspective. And as a leader, I clarify things, but I always tell people, now, if you see something different here, you come and tell me. I want you to be courageous. Don't be afraid. I don't tell them courageous. Don't be afraid to come in here and tell me you see something different and you think we ought to go in a different direction and you have the evidence. Come and confront me and show me that because I want to jump on your side if it's right. Or I may say, I know something you don't know and I'm going to own it. If it fails, it's not your problem. I own it.
Yeah.
So, and then community, you've got to be in community. And that's what really helped us because after 1969, there was a raid at one of the camps in 1970, and they put us all back in the Hanoi Hilton. That's when we went into those cells of 40 to 55 or 60 guys, and we were in a real community. Now, before that, we had been in small communities of 4 to 5 or 6 guys most of the time. And then, but we, uh, adversely, silently communicated with another cell to get more information and learn who they were and when they were captured. And then we started learning poems and Bible verses from them, tapping on the wall in our tap code, or we rolled up a blanket and we could yell out through the 14-foot brick wall. We could yell because if we're in that blanket, they couldn't hear
Wow.
you outside. And the other guy could just put his head on the wall and listen to you. So we
Wow.
were always, trying to communicate and stay in community and help
Yeah.
people out. We would risk our lives a lot of times. We would risk torture a lot of times to communicate with people who were in a solitary confinement or somewhere because we knew we had to get to them and say, hey, man, we're with you. We ain't going home without you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so connecting with people is
Mm.
so important, and being humble and just being yourself. You got to be confident. When you connect with people, you can encourage them and listen to them. That builds a community. And then you identify what are the things in our community here that we have an interest in and kind of stay interested, but don't expect them to be like you,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, yeah, another great lesson there is what I'm pulling out from what you just shared is the community. So you have the mission, right? And you're something that you're working towards. You're maintaining that mental discipline and that emotional discipline to stay focused and fixed on the mission. And then the community, I think that's another piece that in society today, in business, I mean, we have more technology than ever, but people are more disconnected than ever. And they go into isolation. They go into kind of like their own voluntary, isolation and solitary confinement by not letting people in because we don't want people to see our weaknesses, and oftentimes we don't want to be vulnerable. And so even though we may be moving around and physically being in proximity with people, but we're emotionally, mentally, psychologically not in proximity to people. Right. And then we actually think that we're protecting ourselves when in fact we're harming ourselves in that process. And so there's a lot of that going on. I mean, why is it that anxiety and depression and all these things are at an all-time high? That's why I wanted you to talk about this resilience and what we can learn from you and your stories, because, it is literally life and death. There's the suicide rates are up. I mean, not just in the military, not just in first responders, talking about every day, talking about teenagers, ending their life. Why would a teenager at 13 or 14 years old end their life? Like, what has to have happened? And I think about that. It's like, what has to have been going on in their mind and in their life experience and how they interpreted that? Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Instead of being connected to buddies who are like them and share with them and stay connected to them, they're connected here. And that's where you got to pretend you're somebody in order to be accepted by the others. You got to pretend. But when you're a face to face and you're connected like that, and that's the next step is clarify, connect in this model. You've got to be connected with people at the heart level and let them know you care about them. When you do that, it's amazing how much that gives them inspiration and freedom from all the things that are holding them back. When you connect with somebody at the heart level and just let them know, here's what you have to do as a leader, as a teammate. You got to listen to them sometimes. You've got to smile at them. General C.K. Brown, who was chairman of the Secretary of the chairman of the Air Force and the commander until recently, the 4-star, he was talking one day and I was listening and he said, I'm a real introvert. And he said, when I go out in the hall at the Pentagon, I coach myself. Now, CQ, you smile. When you meet somebody in the hall, you smile and say good morning. And I told him, I said, that is brilliant because you're making them feel important and you feel valued. And you're doing that. You're coaching yourself. And that's what one thing leaders have to do. Introverts have to coach themselves to smile and listen to other people. And extroverts have to coach themselves to shut up and listen to other people and get involved in what they are thinking. You just got to adapt. But helping people believe in themselves. And that was another thing that happened. When you were tortured and you came back from the torture sessions and you had given in, and Captain Fisher, who was the guy I was flying with, he said, Lee, you did your best. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And
Just
he
one word
believed
of
in me, and he
encouragement.
was tougher than I was, and he had in the first time we were tortured, he had lasted longer than I had, and the second time we were different times. But he said, "Lee, you did your best. Don't feel ashamed. You did your best. You bounced back." And
Yeah.
he's 88. He'll soon be 89.
Amazing.
He was a senior champion at his golf course at 84.
That's just amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta connect with other people's hearts.
Mm.
We were at the 52nd anniversary reunion this week in Dallas, Texas of the POWs, non-PALs. And I just coached myself to listen. And I listened to two guys were there that I'd never been around a lot. You always around your old roommates a lot, you know. And I just listened to them, and they were 89 and 88. And I listened to them a lot. And I really enjoyed it. You know, it was hard for me to
Yeah.
listen, speak up. But anyway, I was connecting with them. And, you know, you got to collaborate in work. You got to collaborate. You got to learn to
Yes.
get people involved and collaborate and not try to do something on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where this hustle and grind and, Lone Ranger type of self-made man or woman. It's a farce. It doesn't happen that way.
Right.
It doesn't happen that way. Talk
Right.
about some of your favorite stories, or maybe just pick one of your favorite stories from Captured by Love.
You know,
It's hard to pick one, I'm sure.
one of my friends passed away last year, and we just had a funeral for him because he was actually buried. They were building a burial moratorium or whatever it was on his farm here in western North Carolina, which is about an hour and 20 minutes away from here. And so we went up there, and on his the thing for the event, they had his picture on the front. It was a 2-page thing, and it had a picture on the front. And I keep looking at that because his story was so great. He was single when he was captured. He was a POW for 6 years, a fighter pilot. He graduated in the class of 64 from the Air Force Academy. He had won an honor for being the biggest tosser of stones or logs or something when he was very strong. Anyway, he had been thinking about going home someday, and he had his picture of the bride he was going to marry, the girl he was going to marry. And she was tall and a brunette and very strong Christian and da da da. Well, when he came home, he got off the airplane in the U.S. in Montgomery, Alabama. They flew us in, and if you lived in the Southeast, you went to Montgomery. They're the base, Maxwell Air Force Base. And he was getting off the airplane, and he got a little speech, and he said, "Thank you all, da da da." He said, "And I'm still single, and I'm looking forward to meeting girls." And he just threw that out. Well, there was a widow who was Jewish, elevated in the tower because she had been working with her friend who was a POW wife, helping her getting the bracelet sold and all the stuff for the POW MIs. She'd been working on that, and she heard that, and she kind of thought, And her friend introduced her to him 2 weeks later, and he proposed to her in May. He got home in February. He proposed to her in the White House when President Nixon brought us up there. And their story is called Bashert, which in Jewish means getting together and being together.
Oh,
And they had a fantastic marriage, and she had 2 children, and he helped her raise them, and they had a son, and it was just a wonderful couple and a wonderful story. Bashert, it's in the book.
Yeah, there's so I remember reading that one. There's so many beautiful stories in here. And just before we end, talk about the women. You mentioned about the wives, and I did not know that. I mean, partly I'm Canadian, so I don't know as much of the history. I didn't study that in school. But the wives had such an incredible impact.
Yes.
And imagine how much longer you would have been there, and what it would have been like had they not stepped in. So we would be remiss to ignore and not talk about the courage of those women.
Yes. Yeah. I talk in between every chapter. I have a 1-page historical highlight And of course, in the chapters, I mentioned some of the wives that were there and what they did, but historical highlight, and half of them are the POW camp and half of what the wives are doing back home. But the wives really had kept quiet for a couple of years, from 65 until 68, 2.5 years mainly. And
They were
finally,
mandated to, right? They couldn't say anything.
yeah, they weren't told to keep quiet. And finally, they said, our men are coming home, and many of them, most of them, hadn't written a letter home. So they didn't know if they were killed or missing in action or still alive. And so uh, Admiral Commander Stockdale, who was a senior naval officer there, his wife Sybil was in San Diego, and he was a senior naval officer, so she a POW, and she was a senior naval wife. So she started organizing. There were a lot of POW wives and MIA wives in the San Diego area. And she started organizing, and they started putting out publicity and that sort of thing. And then it went from the League of Wives to being the National League of POW MIA Families. And my parents were involved in that. And my mom was going around speaking at Rotary clubs and all that kind of thing. And they put on pressure around the country for people to write letters to the Paris embassy, and the Paris peace talks were going on, and they weren't agreeing to give us peace and to end the war. And a lot of them, Ross Perot paid for a lot of them to travel around the world, and they went in there and met with ambassadors from other countries and put pressure on them to put pressure on the communists to stop the torture and to follow the Geneva Accords of 1954. And so finally, when Ho Chi Minh died, they did. And that just totally changed our lives. What the wives did, and they continued to put pressure on them all the years until the end of the war. And they met with President Nixon and Secretary Laird once every 2 or 3 months, and they would go in and talk. And in 1972, they were about to end the war, and Sybil Stockdale and another wife went in there and met with him and said, "Do not end the war without getting those POWs out of there." Yeah. And Nixon said yes. And that's when we started the big bombing again, the heavy bombing again, and 11 days in Hanoi, and they agreed to stop and end the war. And that was December of 1972. And they signed the agreement in January of 73, a few weeks later. And it said that over the next 60 days, all the POWs would be released in 4 large groups. And the first ones will come home, sick and wounded first. And then the longest ones there will come out February the 12th. And the next group came out February 28th. I was in the third group, came out March 14th. And then the last group came out March 28th or 30th.
Wow.
So the women, and this was in a time when women didn't have much leadership role.
No.
They were amazing.
I mean, you're talking late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
Women
69,
didn't.
70, 71, 72. They had an incredible influence.
Yeah. Amazing. And, even to their own risk, because I know there was there were stories about, going and talking to the communists, and it's like they were putting themselves at risk in that process as well. I mean, you think about not just women here not having a voice, but women over there in communist countries have even less of authority and voice there. So, wow, amazing. And today you are a leadership coach, and you work with, maybe just real briefly. So if there's anybody out there who might be, obviously, we're going to encourage people to get a copy of your book, but if somebody's looking for what you do, your services, just let us know a little bit about that.
I'm mainly doing speaking now. I'm traveling around the world and around the U.S. speaking some, but I'm going to slow that down at the end of the year, but I'll still do some. But I think the main thing is, if you go to my website, leadingwithhonor.com, you can download 5-minute coaching on one. For the last 3 months, I've been talking about resilience. And I tell a little bit of the story from the POW camp, and then I hit on 3 or 4 points that are important today. And you can use those. And there's a written blog every month, and then 5 or 6 minute coaching video every month on that leadingwithhonor.com. And I've been doing that for 10 or 12 years. So there's a lot of background in there. You can go, and there's also handouts. And there's the honor code is in there. It's a 1 page, or you can get the round one with 1 page. And a couple of other pages, but a lot of coaching handouts in there for leadership and teamwork.
Got it. Got
And
it.
then the other website is POWromance.com, and that's where you can download the first two chapters of the POW romance book.
Yeah. This one.
POWromance.com. That's
This one.
that book. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can download it and you can read the introduction. By the way, that was young people don't know who Gary Sinise is, but he was Lieutenant Dan. He's an actor. He's
Oh,
been in many New York police movies, and he still is an actor, and he's been in lots of movies. But he was Lieutenant Dan in that famous movie there. And then the other great guy is Tony Orlando, and his
yes.
song was number one. He and Dawn's song was number one when we came home. It became number one shortly after we came home. It's Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree. And he's still singing in Las Vegas. He's 70 years old, 80. He's be 80
Yeah.
here, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. I heard him at an event conference that I was at, and it was probably 30 years ago now. And he was really famous then. I mean, so it's just, yeah, amazing.
Look him up. He's a great singer and a wonderful guy.
Yeah. Well, Lee, thank you. There's so much more we could talk about and unpack in your stories, but you have, it's the beautiful thing is that you've established a legacy through your website, through your books, where people can learn and unpack. I know these, they're very practical, which I love. It's not just information; it's life experience that you're putting in here, and how do you apply it? Leading with honor, engaging, with honor. And then, of course, the real life stories, true stories, romance stories. I'm just going to encourage everyone. We're going to make sure the links are in the show notes to everything so they can connect with you and follow you and learn more about what you're doing and download that information. But I always say leaders of transformation take action. And sometimes the action is reflecting, stepping back and just reflecting on what we've learned, reflecting on our life experience. And sometimes it's taking action and moving forward and getting things done. I'm going to encourage our listeners here is to reflect on their level of resilience. How resilient, for anyone who's listening or watching, it's like, how resilient do you feel right now? And you may not feel resilient, but you may be resilient. It's sometimes we don't feel it. There's a disconnect there. But in terms of like, we don't see ourselves because we're hard on ourselves. It's like, oh man, I could have done better. Right. And then your friend says, hey, you did your best. And that's what counts. But I would challenge you to look at your resilience and look at your honor, your commitment, your courage, your character, and look at some of these things that we've talked about today, and maybe do a little assessment on yourself and where can you grow, where can you improve, and leaders of transformation. It starts with us, right? It starts with us transforming our lives, transforming our mindset, transforming the way that we see ourselves, others, and the world around us, in order for us to actually create that lasting change that we're looking to create, lead others in transformation and change as well. And so I would just encourage you to reflect on your level of resilience, your level of courage and commitment, and say, like, where can I grow? Where can I improve? And maybe hone in on one quality that you say, I want to get better at this. I want to be more resilient. I want to be more courageous. I want to connect more. I want to feel more committed to what it is that I'm doing. Maybe I haven't had a mission, and maybe I'm, just wandering and semi-retired or whatever. And it's like, I got to find a new mission, something to work towards. Or maybe I've just been going through the motions for, and feeling uninspired. Find a mission, find something to commit yourself to, and find some people to commit with you to whatever it is that you're doing. And so anyway, I wasn't expecting to share that, but maybe somebody needs to hear that. And if it's just one person, then it was worth it. So
Great coaching, Nicole. Great coaching.
Thank you. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Every individual is unique. And that's why you may not be like that person or that person. That's okay. You have to believe in yourself, and God has a role for us to play, a unique role. And he's given us the talents, and he lets us go into situations and just commit to that. And you're going to be great and enjoy life.
Yeah. Amen. Well, Lee, thank you again so much. We appreciate you. And thank you to our listeners and our viewers. Just appreciate you being here. Hope that you are inspired and encouraged today. And we would love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com and find us there. Of course, we're on social as well. And of course, go to leadingwithhonor.com and connect with Lee as well. And we'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes, his Facebook, his LinkedIn, and all the places that he's on social as well. So you can be more resilient and be able to overcome adversity in your life and become the leader of transformation that you're capable of being. Have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.